Welcome to the Aware AI Brief. This is a monthly video series that we've been doing that discusses what I like to think of as real life AI governance questions, topics, discussions, and feedback specifically that comes from you that are listening or you that we're engaging with online. And so keep those coming for sure. I'm Cameron Gaudette, and as always, I'm joined by Walter Haydock of StackAware. Hello there, sir. How are you doing today?
Cameron, good to see you again. I know we've had a little break in our sessions because of travel delays and things like that.
Yeah,
I got hit with 3 feet of snow a couple months ago, and it sounds like you're getting some weather right now. So,
yeah,
good to be back with you.
yes, yeah. Good. Always appreciate and take advantage of when we can meet like this and discuss. And as I mentioned before, these are topics or comments or things like that that come from people, from listeners, from people that we are connected with, and just discussions that are happening in real time. So again, I'll say it over and over like a broken record, but send the questions, send any comments, things that you are seeing, things that you have questions on, or just things that you might want to see discussed as well. So, without further ado, let's jump into some of the submissions that we received from this past month. And the first question that had come up was, how large does a company have to be in order to recommend or to look to certify with ISO 42001? And I'll say maybe twofold. One, how large as far as size, employees wise, and maybe also just kind of profit or earnings wise as well.
ISO 42001 is a framework that's appropriate for organizations of literally any size, and I mean literally. As an example, StackAware itself, which has one full-time employee, me, is ISO 42001 certified. Alternatively, you have Amazon Web Services, which has hundreds of thousands of employees. They also have an ISO 42001 certification, although I'll note that it covers only a few products in terms of scope. So the certification is appropriate for any size of organization. And a really nice piece of ISO is that it is flexible enough to meet the needs of various sizes of organizations. And, some of the requirements in there say you need to consider the size and complexity of the company that's being certified when you're making decisions about processes, about documentation, things like that. So there's not going to be a one size fits all ISO program for a given company, and it only makes sense to tailor it based on the size. And obviously, in terms of profit or revenue, the company is going to need to have some free cash flow to pay for the effort to prepare and to pay the auditors to come in and assess. But overall, it can be a relatively small piece of the pie when it comes to security and compliance if that's a big focus for your organization.
Got it. And I guess I kind of had a follow-up question with it too, but I'm sure you get asked this, just kind of blanketly, but like cost of it, is that often determined by the scope for 42001, or is that usually like within a range from what you're seeing or discussions you're having as far as the cost for that certification?
The cost of ISO 42001 is definitely going to depend on the size of the company and the scope. So, for example, if you have a small company and a narrow scope, you're only focused on the AI producer role for a narrow set of products or a single product, then the certification fee is going to be relatively small. In contrast, if you've got a really big company and you're certifying in the user role, where basically everybody in the organization is in scope, that includes tools like ChatGPT or other commercial productivity systems, then your cost is probably going to be a little higher. So it depends on what your objectives are to get the certification to decide how you're going to scope it.
Sure. Yeah, that makes all the sense in the world. Just kind of that, and that's one of the things that I think is is so intriguing about ISO 42001, right? Is kind of how it covers the broad net, as it were, but kind of refining within that scope and the specificity of your organization too. Second question that had come in was how do you avoid constant turnover of your AI inventory? People know they need an inventory or registry of AI use, but worried that it'll be out of date within a month. Kind of that turnover, or maybe not so much turnover as just updating, right? Like any AI system, AI models that these AI tools or agents are based off of, kind of updating fairly frequently. How do you approach that, or maybe avoid turnover?
If you want to keep your AI inventory up to date, I'm going to say it's very difficult to avoid rapid turnover if you're applying change control to individual models used in things like ChatGPT or Anthropic. As we've seen, there have been very rapid releases from OpenAI and similar companies. So you're just going to need to stay on top of it. I will say that having a spreadsheet based inventory is going to be very challenging, as you alluded to. So my recommendation is that organizations automate their asset inventory and change control processes as much as possible. And you could say it's easy for me to say at Stackware because it's a small company, but our software bill of materials plugs in directly to our asset inventory. So every time we make a change there, our website gets updated. We send notifications to any customers who have subscribed to those updates, and it kicks off some Jira change control tickets on our end. So that allows us to stay on top of the change control process. And for bigger organizations, you're going to need to be even more disciplined because there are going to be more moving parts. There are going to be more people involved. So automating and simplifying your processes is key. But unfortunately, I don't think we're going to be able to avoid AI asset inventory turnover anytime soon.
Right. Right, just the criticality of it to begin with, right? Like, I know you've made some posts and talked a little bit about just you know asset inventory in general and kind of what a mess it is. When I read that comment, I definitely I felt seen, but I also like saw where they were coming from. Where I was like, this is someone obviously operating most likely out of spreadsheets, and as you mentioned, that can get quite overwhelming, and and isn't just winds up not being the correct tool for it, right? When you have a lot of that turnover, or just when you have a lot of those updates. Um,
Yeah,
another,
and
yeah.
one comment on that is, something I've even seen from the bigger governance, risk, and compliance tools is, and I partner with some of these folks, so I won't name them, but they will have an asset inventory and then they'll have a risk register, but there's no cross linkage of
Mm,
the two, which to me is a little bit strange because I'm not sure how you can talk about risks without knowing what your assets are or tying the risks back to assets. So with a spreadsheet, unless you have some crazy macro going on, it's
yeah,
going to be very challenging to tie those risks in a real-time way back to the assets that are applicable. So my recommendation is having a structured database where you can make those associations in a real time, in a non-brittle way.
yeah, yeah. That's helpful, and just part of, kind of, as not to beat a dead horse, but just part of the changing landscape, right? As far as like what works in the past versus what's needed for today. Um, Documentation. Someone had asked a question about the question was, what minimum documentation is needed per AI use case? I'm taking a little bit of liberty to understand the question. Thinking about bringing on an AI system or vendor, perhaps. Um, just thinking about like what are the bare essentials when it comes to documentation you would need up front, or maybe just when you're researching something yourself that you might be looking to use.
The documentation you need for a given AI use case will vary on your business requirements, your regulatory requirements, things like that. If you are a solopreneur who's running a marketing agency and you are vibe coding or vibe marketing a campaign for a customer, potentially the amount of documentation you need about your AI tools is zero because you're not in a high risk by any regulatory definition area. You are not dealing with confidential information if it's a marketing campaign, most likely. So, it's potentially appropriate for you to have no documentation. And, if you're a solo operator, then moving fast and delivering value will be the most important thing. Now, conversely, if you are a deployer or developer of a high risk AI system, according to Colorado SB 205, you have a lot of documentation that you're required to produce with respect to data sources, with respect to method of operation, with respect to how you can opt out of processing using the system. So it really depends on what your regulatory requirements and your business needs are when you're determining what documentation you should produce.
Yeah. I, I feel like as you were responding there, I feel like I was like there seems to be a theme, right, in a lot of these questions, which are, you know, what regulation affects you, and specifically like what are you trying to do, right? And I think that's where conversations like we're trying to have of real life AI governance are necessary and actually have, merit and value. At the same time, it does come down to a lot of these scopes and fits and regulations that apply to you specifically. So I just, as you were talking, I was like, that seems to come up a lot, right? Like it does kind of depend on what you're using it for and what kind of business, what world you're operating in within your industry.
And if you look at ISO 42001, clause 4.1 is focused on the context of the organization, looking at internal and external issues. So that sets the frame for everything else because you need to understand the environment you're working in before you really do anything else.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. Another question was, what's a realistic training and awareness program about AI for perhaps non-technical staff? So how would you said you're, one of one for your organization, but in counseling other organizations that might have, employees they want to raise awareness of AI use, especially if they're using it as an organization. What have you found, or what do you see that works or is beneficial for training awareness programs?
I think you can look outside the box when you're developing AI training for staff. So there's certainly things you can do like the traditional PowerPoint presentations, and StackAware will customize these for our customers based on the systems they're using, based on their regulatory requirements, based on their compliance needs, and make sure that, we get them a tailored package. Now, for organizations that don't necessarily want to do that, they can go out, they can look at YouTube videos, they can look at LinkedIn Learning, they can look at blog posts. And, frankly, what matters is, are you getting actionable information that's going to change your behavior, not how polished is it? So, for example, I had someone raise an eyebrow over the fact that at one point I referred to a Reddit post about a given product as being a source of information about it, from a risk perspective. But, I would say, well, why does Reddit exist? Reddit exists is because people want the ground truth. They want to know what's actually
Sure.
going on. They don't want a finely polished kind of response from a given company. They want to know, like, what's really happening. Okay, the
Yeah.
company says X, but is Y happening? So I would say get to the ground truth of what's going on. And I would say companies should be not afraid to encourage their teams to pursue unconventional learning. And, maybe you can evaluate their competence using the ISO 42001 language, evaluate their competence through a quiz or something like that to determine whether they understand the key concepts, but don't necessarily force feed them some kind of boring PowerPoint presentation if the people want to do other things.
Yeah, I was going to add to that too. Like, what do you find works for your other training, right? Like, what do you find is easily received? What do you find? We've all been in training sessions. We all know within 3 minutes, if the room is engaged or not. And it's tough to get people to engage. I understand that, especially when they see on the calendar, staff training or something of that remark. but see what works, with other training you do, safety training, orientation type of tools, and kind of follow suit with some of those would be a good way to start too. I'm going to the next couple ones. I'm a sports nerd. I love sports, and so I stole something from typical sports talk radio. Right. For those of you that were born within the last 25 years, radio is this thing that we listen. No, I'm just kidding. I said I have a 5-year-old, and I was like, "How do you describe the radio to a 5-year-old?" Right? It's like free Spotify on shuffle. like like trying to figure out everybody. You can pick exact songs we want now, but sports talk
That
radio.
reminds me, have
Yeah.
you seen Silicon Valley?
Yes. Yeah.
The guy who's like, I put radio on the internet.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you just need to explain that actually before then it was the reverse. It was
Right.
radio off the internet.
Right, for sure. Yeah. Yeah, have to explain it all. Um anyway, sports talk radio is what gave me the idea for some of these questions here. I'm going to list off a couple things, and we'll do overhyped, underhyped, or hyped, properly hyped, right? So like in sports, people do this with athletes or teams or ideas all the time. And I thought it'd be fun to do with some of the maybe more hot topics of today with in regards to AI governance. So the first one, again, overhyped, underhyped, properly hyped, and maybe why. Running AI locally.
Overhyped, not that it's necessarily bad, and it can certainly make sense if you've got cost constraints, if you've got the expertise to do it. I would say that from a security perspective, it's neutral. It brings with it some risks, mainly in that you're responsible for configuration, for updating, all that type of stuff, whereas you aren't if you're using a SaaS tool. So, you have more flexibility, you can control the compute, things like that. But, a lot of the times people have started referring to their infrastructure as a service environments as on premises, but it's not actually on premises. It's just in another cloud. It's in a private cloud for you, a virtual private cloud, essentially. So I would say it's overhyped because it is not a catch all. It is not a end all be all. And, someone commented on one of my videos when I was talking about it, and they said, what could possibly happen if you have, an AI system deployed locally and not connected to the internet? I said, nothing,
Right.
congratulations, perfectly secure, but there's zero really productivity gain from having something that's not connected to the
Right.
internet. So,
Right.
it's all about trading off risks.
Yeah. Yeah, good. I do think that it gets talked often as kind of an easy solve for some security concerns, and so I think it's good to point out the risks that are included when you are running AI locally that aren't as a service.
And yeah,
Yeah.
on that note, like I was talking to a financial services CISO who was telling me he was getting ready to start buying NVIDIA A100 chips and setting up a server farm to do all their AI processing. And I was like, you know, are you a data center company, or what happens
Yeah, no
when Johnny
kidding.
trips over the power cord? Then you've got a huge availability problem there. So
Right.
it's definitely not a silver bullet.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It sounds like a superhero or anti-hero origin story in the making to have all that big of a setup, right? Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, the second one though, overhyped, underhyped, properly hyped. You had alluded to it a little bit before, so I don't want to step on any toes of relationships built, but AI governance tools or platforms, just kind of as a whole, right? At all, like how do you view them?
I would say they're properly hyped. The key thing is that no tool is going to fix a broken program, because once you have workflows and things like that defined, that doesn't necessarily mean people are going to follow them. And I would recommend building the program and finding the tool to implement it, rather than finding a tool and saying, okay, now we've solved all the problems. Because
Yeah.
I've seen people use these GRC tools and AI governance tools in an effective manner. And I've seen people also kind of, you know, halfway use them, and then everything's actually on spreadsheets, which brings you back to the brings you back to the original place where you were, except you're spending more money. So my recommendation is build the program, select the tool to implement it.
Mm. Yeah, that's really good advice. I'd run into that a couple months back as well, where it was, um, really good idea as far as a GRC tool that was looking to be used, and to your point, it wound up just kind of being a mirrored reflection of what was happening on spread. The spreadsheets were carrying the work, and this was kind of more of like an overview dashboard, basically, is what it was. So again, finding the correct fit for what you're already doing, rather than trying to force something to happen. Um, the third one, over under properly hyped, model evaluation benchmarks. So if you open up, the latest Gemini or the latest GPT model card, they'll throw you all these different metrics, right? Benchmark for fairness or bias or red team scores or safety leaderboards. How do you feel about model evaluation benchmarks as a whole?
I think model evaluation benchmarks are slightly underhyped, and I'll talk about how Stackware uses them. For example, we use the Vectara open source hallucination leaderboard in our data. It's an open source project, so we can pull that and ingest that into Stackaware, and that's something we use to help calculate risk from a data integrity perspective, because hallucination is a data integrity risk. So it's absolutely something that you can use as part of your risk assessment program. The key is standardizing that information. You mentioned kind of the OpenAI model cards, like those come out in PDF format. It's very challenging to parse some of that information, as I know you personally have done on
Mhm.
Stackware's behalf. So I think the key is getting it in a structured format is really important, because then that lets you compare apples to apples and understand what you're missing, what you have.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I mean, for what it's worth, I do think that they have a lot of value and a lot of benefit. I think if it's the first thing that you're throwing to say, hey, this is fine, that's probably a cause for at least diving deeper into it. But on the whole, definitely agree. Couple more we'll do for these. The next one, innovation first or a light touch approach to AI governance. I think that's becoming much talked about, especially when it comes to evaluating how in the U.S. AI regulation is going to happen or be implemented. So that kind of light touch approach to AI governance. How do you see that?
From a regulatory perspective, I think a light touch makes sense, because right now America's developing the worst possible system that we could imagine, in my opinion, which is having 50 different state laws and creating lots of conflicting standards, and then the federal government's threatening to sue some states to block some of their legislation that's coming online. So frankly, I think that's the worst possible approach, and I'd love to see some standardized regulation across the US that sets kind of a minimum standard, and then we can talk about increasing the standard from there. I mean, America already has a lot of different laws, so you know let's be careful about introducing new laws and regulations. From an organizational perspective, I can certainly see an approach where you might be more risk welcoming when it comes to artificial intelligence, from the perspective of data integrity. Maybe you're okay with kind of malformed outputs, so based on your use case. I mentioned previously, if you're running a marketing agency, like sometimes hallucinations are a feature rather than a bug, because then you get new content that you didn't plan on getting.
Yeah.
But in heavily regulated areas like healthcare, I still think there's a lot of room for innovation. And I think, we're facing a lot of risks as a nation from our healthcare crisis in terms of affordability and accessibility. So AI can help there. And it doesn't make sense to say take zero risk. At the same time, organizations in those heavily regulated spaces need to be thoughtful about what they're doing and will need to apply more controls as they roll out artificial intelligence, especially if it's touching things like protected health information. With that said, I can see different risk appetites for different use cases, um, being appropriate for different businesses.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good way to kind of delineate, from the more high level or regulation side of it, and also then for organizations specifically. Last one I wanted to end on, just because I know it has been all the rage, and I'll let you go with it however you want, but the Claude Mythos
Mythos, I think. Yeah.
Mythos, is it? Okay, all right.
I think
I'll
so.
get,
I think so.
obviously I don't even know how to pronounce it.
I mean, I don't either. That's how I think.
But that obviously caused quite a stir in recent memory here. I, per usual, on any big AI news, AI security related news, you get a lot. Everybody that has amplified voice, sometimes it's the doomsdays or the this will be our savior type of thing. But as a whole, like these types of developments, with what we're seeing with this specifically, do you see them as kind of being overhyped, underhyped, or properly hyped? Is it something that kind of is discussed about how it should?
Right now, I think Claude Mythos is overhyped. It could be appropriately hyped at some future point when we actually see the system in operation. I did make a LinkedIn post that was a little bit snarky, saying like maybe I should just leak some of my source code that refers to a code name project, and then refer to it as reckoning, and talk
Yeah.
about how it's gonna change the world. And then you'll notice immediately after that, OpenAI said, "Oh well, we have GPT 4.5.4 Cyber,
Right.
and we're not releasing that either," which I thought was,
Right.
it was pretty
Yeah.
clear what was going on there. Like,
Yeah.
OpenAI was not going to be caught off guard from the marketing perspective. So I think there's a lot of marketing hype going on. It remains to be seen whether the reality matches that hype. And certainly, if there's a model that can identify, I think it was like several hundred zero-day
Hmm.
vulnerabilities in Firefox, which Firefox did independently report. So I think there is some evidence there. Then that is something to pay attention to.
Hmm.
And I think that if the blue team, so to speak, can get access to these types of systems before red teams can, well, I mean, ethical red teams, fine, but
Sure. Sure.
unethical red teams,
Yep.
that will be an issue. So I do think a phased approach, if it is that groundbreaking, a phased rollout to industry to allow companies to, prove their bona fides and then get access to it. I think that is a good approach. Remains to be seen how earth shaking it will be, but it could be.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a good perspective on it. And I think sometimes when these types of things are discussed, there's the reaction of what it means today, and then there's the reaction of what it could mean, right? So there's always that in a little bit of tension, or maybe not tension, just a duality of understanding with these things as innovation continues and as developments come out. I also did get a chuckle both out of your post and also out of the out of OpenAI coming up with their quick "don't forget about us"
Yeah,
reaction as well. So
yeah,
yeah, some of that's wise to be able to discern and understand the benefit of some of these things being released as well for the companies that are doing so. Well, that's all the questions that I had for today that had come in. Once again, if you guys have questions, if you're listening to this and you're like, I've always wondered blank such and such, feel free to send them in, comment on the video, send them to Walter or my LinkedIn DM, or I know you're very active on posts, and feel free to comment on those with questions. And love to keep them coming. love to have the questions being asked and the conversation continuing. So, Walter, thank you for hopping on here, and thank you all for watching Aware AI Brief.
Cameron, good to see you again. Thanks a lot.